One thing, it just struck me, I've seen this comparison made often. I wanted to get you to comment on it, but the idea of booster shots every however many months, isn't that analogous to, getting a flu shot every year or something like this?
Well, yes and no. We've known for a few decades that flu shots are safe, almost entirely safe, that they maybe don't work as well as we'd like, if at all, in some people. But aside from that if something is really proven to be safe and not damaging to the immune system in other respects, then it's like what I said early on for hydroxychloroquine. Even if we don't know that it works, we know that it's safe. There's no downside. There can only be an upside. The only downside would be that you gave it instead of giving something else that might have been better. And since we didn't have anything that we knew was better at the time, there couldn't have been a downside. And the same is true for the flu vaccine, and every year we have a new flu vaccine, in theory, made to combat the new strain of the illness, of the virus. Whereas now we're giving a 1.5-year-old boosters. Would you take a 1.5-year-old flu vaccine? No. Why would you take a 1.5-year-old COVID vaccine? Okay. Well, the argument is that it works partially, or it works well for some people, or it works well enough. I don't know how to evaluate the well enough aspect of things. I'm an epidemiologist because I don't really like virology or basic science or do it well enough to be professional in that. I'm professional in epidemiology, where I take all that and see what happens in people. So to me, the bottom line is what happens in people when we do studies of people to see what actually matters. And so I think that it's clear that the vaccines have been beneficial in large degree for at least short periods of time. And we don't know the damage that they're doing in longer time frame, and we don't know how long they actually do work. And now we're getting information that they work on the order of 6 months, maybe plus or minus, for different aspects, for reduction of infection, for reduction of mortality risk, for reduction of hospitalization risk, different outcomes. Each one has to be studied on its own. So we are still evolving in knowledge.
So you've touched on this already, but I guess as we finish up here, what does this whole reality of the fear and the reaction and corporate interest and all this stuff that what does this say about the medical profession as it stands, and what needs to happen?
Without being too dramatic about this, there was an outstanding essay in Tablet magazine from a few months ago written by Ashley Hernandez, talking about why doctors in Germany in the 1930s became Nazis. And the whole public health institution and the medical institution in Germany in the 1930s promoted the Nazi propaganda and messaging construed for how to manage public health. And at times of famine, they decided that if this whole society couldn't support food for everybody, that they would remove the people who needed the food the least, meaning helpless, handicapped, disabled young people, frail elderly, and so on, who were expendable when the food had to go around to the people who needed it, whatever that meant, And they operationalized rational considerations without human moral considerations. And public health has the risk of doing that. And that's what's happened to us in our society, and I was recognizing this more than a year ago. When you have big lies being propagated as propaganda through the media, through the government, through agencies, and so on, that the don't believe your lying eyes. All these doctors treating outpatients successfully. Oh no, those drugs don't work. This was a big lie then. Why and who was purveying this was that message. This is, I think, why Dr. Hernandez wrote this essay in the first place, because she was recognizing the commonalities to what was happening now. When you have so much day in, day out propaganda that people believe it because they're bombarded with it through all of the major media, that they accept these messages and they act on those messages instead of the truth, the reality of life and science and medicine. So doctors, I think, are just as frightened, just as anxious as everybody else, and maybe more so, because they've invested so much time and effort into getting their careers going. They feel they have more to risk even than just Joe Plumber, or somebody else. They went into their field because of stature and considerations of accomplishment and doing well for society and their patients and all of that. They feel that they are at higher risk in some intangible way, I think. And so they're more likely to toe the line, and those lines have been enforced on them through the corruption of all the medical agencies, the medical review boards of all the states, largely all the states. The pharmacy review boards have all pushed a top-down message coming from FDA, CDC, WHO. I have to get in a comment about the FDA and its website. This is something that has made me the angriest over this last year and a half, which is in July of 2020, the FDA mounted a website warning against hydroxychloroquine used for outpatients. The website's still there. It says, warning, hydroxychloroquine should not be used for outpatient treatments because of risk of cardiac adverse events. And then in the small print, the fine print, underneath that big bold black letter warning, it says, we base this warning on adverse events that we have observed in hospital patients. This is a fraud. They used hospital disease, which all medical professionals recognize as a different disease, as I've said, than outpatient flu-like illness. That has stood up there. Everyone that says hydroxychloroquine can't be used points to that website and says, here's the reason why we can't do it. The states, the AMA, the pharmacy board, they all point to that. Foreign countries, their governments all point to that, saying we can't do it because the FDA says not to do it. And I've railed against this in the media that we're a part of, and the way that the propaganda reacts to this is ignore it. Ignore all of this. And I'm saying this now because the general public has to be the one that gets angry. The general public should be furious at the way people have been treated in the country by suppression of these drugs, by that kind of website that suppresses the ability of doctors to practice medicine. This is what should have been done and why people should be angry. They should be angry at the government. They should be angry at President Trump for not leading the fight in this when he was in power. They should be angry at the government now for not leading the fight to make these drugs available. These drugs work, there's no question, and they should have been out there. Whether or not vaccines are used, and there's a role for vaccines, and I'm not saying that, there's no role for universal vaccination, but there is a role for targeted vaccination for people who have reasons to do the risk-benefit analysis and see it's in their benefit. And there's a reason why those people will still get COVID, that the vaccines are not 100% effective and may still need to have treatment, and these drugs are the treatments of choice. This has to be there, and people need to be angry about this to see why these drugs have been suppressed from them for reasons that have nothing to do with the science and the medicine.
Okay, you're given the opportunity to create policy at the level of the CDC or FDA. As our final question, what do you do?
You open up, you remove the FDA's website, you apologize for it, you say that there's a role for these medications to be used, you basically open the tap, as some states have done. Florida and Texas have been pretty free about prescribing, allowing the prescription of the medications. There are other states where they are free but quiet about it. And so you open those taps and you let people become knowledgeable. You get them out. We've still got 60 million doses of hydroxychloroquine in the strategic national stockpile. That should be released. There's no shortage of that. The drug can be made in about 15 minutes. That the raw ingredients, it's a very simple drug to make. The raw ingredients are plentiful. That it's made all over the world. That's why it's so inexpensive to make. And so it can be supplied in very large quantity. Ivermectin can be made in large quantity. It takes a little longer to make it, but it's still something that can be made relatively straightforwardly. And so you do that. You make those medications available. You make the recipes for doing this available to doctors to know how to do it.